Jim Montgomery was fired by the Boston Bruins on Tuesday, and given the circumstances, it was the right call.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about today. It is Wednesday, November 20th, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get in on the action with FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And before we get started breaking down the firing of Jim Montgomery on Tuesday, a quick thank you for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. And you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. And I've got some thoughts here on the firing of Jim Montgomery. It was something that was widely speculated as the Bruins are in the midst of an 8-9-3 start, which isn't particularly awful. They're hovering around 500, but it's the way that they have lost some of these games and their overall stats that suggest things are really off at the moment for this team. And it all came to a head with Monday's 5-1 loss to Columbus, a team that's below them in the standings. And it's the way that they lost that one in particular that was quite egregious. And the writing was on the wall. Losing 5-1 on home ice, an inability to defend, and you were also outscored while on the power play. The Bruins have struggled to score all season long. They haven't been particularly good defending. We all know Jeremy Swayman's struggles in net. The penalty kill has been terrible. The power play has been awful. And with expectations always sky high in Boston, especially after investing quite heavily in the offseason in a couple prime free agents in Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, as well as signing what we thought would be an elite goaltender in Jeremy Swayman long-term, to get out to this kind of start where a playoff spot is already in jeopardy just a week shy of Thanksgiving. All of these things added up to Jim Montgomery being let go. Is it particularly fair? Not really. Is it the right move to pretty much keep the whole staff together and promote Joe Sacco while bumping Jim Montgomery out of the mix? I don't know if that's going to have a huge effect. We'll talk later about roster composition and whether or not that is the big issue. But don't forget, Joe Sacco is already an associate coach with the Bruins, which is different from an assistant coach. He was basically second in command. We saw him take over the bench in the past when Jim Montgomery had to take a couple days off for personal reasons. So you're essentially keeping the same coaching staff together, just minus the head guy. But Joe Sacco was already elevated above the assistant role, second in command, someone that the guys could go to, and we'll see if that makes a difference. Is Joe Sacco able to get more out of the core group that's been underperforming so far this season? Is he able to navigate the goalie rotation a bit better and give Jeremy Swayman the confidence to find his game? Is he able to get Lindholm and Zadorov fully acclimated to the Bruins system and feeling more comfortable? Again, it's not necessarily fair, but the circumstances since the beginning of let's go back to the playoffs, the loss to the Florida Panthers all through the summer. training camp, Cam Neely has said that the Bruins have seemed unsettled since the start of camp, and that is due partly to the fact that Jeremy Swayman was not a participant because of his contract stalemate with the club. You have both Brad Marchand and now we've learned David Pastrnak, who were injured over the summer and were not able to do their regular training regimens. You have these marquee free agent additions that are not panning out at all so far. And you have a bunch of guys like Charlie Coyle, Trent Frederick, Pavel Zacha, Morgan Geekie, who have underperformed greatly this season. Now, is that a coaching tactical issue? Is it a motivation issue? Or is this team just not that good? And whoever you bring in to coach isn't really going to get much more out of them. I think it's, again, not the fact that they're a 500 team or just below 500, but it's the fact that their goal differential is near the bottom of the Eastern Conference. It's the fact that they've been absolutely shelled a couple of times this season, losing 8-2 to the Carolina Hurricanes, 7-2 to the Dallas Stars, being shut out by a team like the Philadelphia Flyers. And again, the loss the other night to Columbus was something had to change after that point. You cannot continue on without some sort of shakeup. And it's clear by some of the body language on the bench, interactions with the players. We talk about Montgomery and the screaming at Brad Marchand on the bench a few weeks ago, making contact with him on the back, benching David Pastrnak for an entire period, kind of calling out Jeremy Swayman the other night after his performance against Columbus, saying, you can't just miss training camp and expect to come in at full speed once the regular season begins. He had played all his cards. He had tried to get the team going. He had tried to call out the team's best players, save for Charlie McAvoy, I guess, who's also been underperforming. But it's clear that the body language on the bench from Montgomery, his responses after recent losses saying he didn't have any answers, you just got to pick yourself up and keep going. Didn't have a real explanation for why the team was struggling and was kind of just putting the lines in a blender, which was a knock on him for his entire tenure as Bruins head coach. It didn't seem like he had the room or was able to guide this team forward out of this early season slump or whatever you want to call it. So Jim Montgomery is out. Joe Sacco is in. Joe Sacco, of course, does have some head coaching experience on his resume. He coached the Colorado Avalanche for 300 games between the regular season and the playoffs. It's been more than a decade, though, since he was a head coach at the NHL level. And he was also coach of the Avalanche team that bottomed out and subsequently drafted Nathan MacKinnon. And that's where they, of course, began their rise to the team they are today. One of the big knocks on Montgomery was his performance in the postseason as head coach, regularly outcoached by Paul Maurice in those two series against the Panthers. Joe Sacco only has 6 playoff games as a head coach on his resume, going 2-4 in a series loss with the Avs back in 2010. So talk about an upgrade here. Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet said the Bruins do believe in Sacco and they're willing to give him a look here, maybe the balance of the regular season and into the playoffs if they can even get there. But whether or not he's a long-term solution remains to be seen. And now the focus shifts on management and roster composition, and we'll discuss that shift here as the podcast continues. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. There's 10 million users and you can sign up today. They put their members first. All withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. They now also offer Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your account this sports season. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's PrizePicks. Download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. With PrizePicks, you can run your game all season long. I don't know about you, but I'm a huge fan of attending live sports and concerts. In fact, next week I'm going to see the Arkells. And I always check Game Time for the best available deals on tickets near me. They have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams or bands play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I love the view from your seat. You know exactly what to expect when you arrive at the venue. And by toggling on the all-in pricing feature, there are no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today because what time is it? It's game time. All right, here we have a situation where Don Sweeney has fired another head coach. This will be his third firing after having let go Claude Julien in the past, Bruce Cassidy, and now Jim Montgomery, all three of whom won Jack Adams Awards as members of, or as coaches of the Boston Bruins. Claude Julien, of course, won a Stanley Cup with the Bruins. Bruce Cassidy led the team to Game 7 of the final and then won the Cup with Vegas the season after being fired by the Bruins. What happens to Jim Montgomery remains to be seen, but I would not be surprised if he is scooped up soon by another team because he had a pretty good run in the regular season, at least with the Bruins, and we'll discuss how he will be remembered later on in the podcast. But for now, the focus clearly is on Don Sweeney and Cam Neely. You only, on average, get around 2.2 fires per general manager. That's from an article a couple of years ago that broke down how things go. So now it's a situation where it is up to management to prove that the roster as built can be successful. That it's not a coaching issue, that it is a coaching issue, that it was Jim Montgomery who couldn't guide this team. Now they believe that Joe Sacco will be the guy. And if he's not, then it becomes more of a roster composition issue. The Bruins are no longer Jim Montgomery's problem, as Fluto Shinzawa said in his article today. And he put it very well. If Joe Sacco gets the team back on track, it will confirm what Sweeney believes, that the roster is sound. However, if Sacco cannot right the ship, it will expose Sweeney's team building approach as compromised. There's a real argument here that he invested heavily this past offseason in the wrong areas. That he's built the team around 3 second, third line centers in Elias Lindholm, Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha, He allowed Jake DeBrusk to leave in free agency and did not find a replacement for him. The belief was that a young guy like Fabian Lysell or Georgi Merkulov could step in, or Trent Frederick would jump up and take that role. Lysell did not pan out in training camp. Merkulov is up and contributing, so that's a good sign. But you have not only DeBrusk leaving, but also Danton Heinen, James Van Riemsdyk, who, of course, scored the other night in that game versus Columbus. And you just don't have the forward depth there to carry the load. You have your star wingers in Brad Marchand, David Pastrnak, who again were banged up over the summer, off-season surgeries for one, an injury for the other that kept him off the ice. And those guys both slow to get going, so hopefully they'll pick their games up, as they have been a little bit recently. But you also have the decision to trade Linus Ullmark. And while Don Sweeney basically said that had to happen because both guys wanted to be the guy in net and they weren't going to re-sign Linus Ullmark, then the fact that the goaltending isn't as good as it has been led to Jim Montgomery's downfall as well. Now, make no mistake, Jeremy Swayman has been outplayed by Ullmark's replacement in Joonas Korpisalo. Swayman, having missed training camp, there's been enough time now for him to find his game, but maybe we'll see here how the defensive system will be improved to help Swayman. But teammates' mistakes were also contributing to his poor numbers to date. So the Bruins, as I've said for a while now, have not been the strongest defensive team dating back to last season, even the season before. But they had a goaltending tandem that could save them from those problems. Now they have Korpisalo, who's been above average in net, to his credit, and to Bob Essence's credit as goalie coach. Jeremy Swayman, well below average. And if he can turn it around, then it will make Joe Sacco look like a genius for helping get this team back on track. But the goaltending, you always say a great coach always has a great goaltender. And the fact that Ullmark gone and Swayman is struggling, that was not helping Jim Montgomery at all. So if you look at the roster composition, you think you have a one goalie in Swayman, pretty good backup right now in Korpisalo. You invested in Nikita Zadorov on the back end. That has not panned out at all. A rotating or a revolving door in and out of the penalty box, an NHL leading 13 minor penalties. Not speedy at all. He's big and can level the boom, but that has been a bust so far for sure. Same with Lindholm. Elias, only one 5-on-5 goal so far this season. And you compound that with losing Hampus Lindholm, who had been their best player so far. And that's something that's out of your control. But those two key free agent signings have not panned out at all. And when you talk about Cam Neely saying the team has seemed unsettled since the beginning of training camp, there's been distractions. Well, it was Neely who kind of magnified those distractions by making public the offer that was given to Swayman with that infamous 64 million reasons question. So while there's probably some resentment against Swayman for making things public by saying he kind of wanted to reset the goalie market and he understands the cap and all that kind of stuff. All of that was a huge distraction during training camp. And you contrast that with Brad Marchand saying he didn't want to talk about his upcoming contract extension, which is a whole other conversation because he's clearly on the downside of things, and they can't be paying him in the future to make up for the fact that he had a team-friendly deal. Anyways, that's a conversation for another day. Plus, you bring in Max Jones, Riley Tufte. There's a real argument to be made here that the Bruins are chock full of mid to bottom 6 forwards and have maybe 4 top 6 forwards in the mix, maybe, with David Pastrnak, of course, Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle, Elias Lindholm, Brad Marchand. I mean, maybe 4 there between Zacha, Marchand, Pastrnak, and Lindholm. But maybe one of those guys is a top line guy on a real good team. So that plus some other guys who have not been stepping up there. Trent Fredericks, your Morgan Geekies. Yeah, there's a real case to be made here for the fact that this roster is not built to be very good as constructed. Things have gone awry with some of your core players like Swayman. Pastrnak not coming in full steam after a full season of training. Same with Brad Marchand. Yes, it takes time for guys to become acclimated to new systems and cities and locker rooms. So we can give Zadorov and Lindholm some more buffer here, and maybe they'll respond better to Joe Sacco. But make no mistake, now that this move has been made, maybe they get the chance to hire a permanent head coach with Joe Sacco having the interim tag. But if this team continues to fail, then the calls for replacement at the management and even team president level will just continue to rise. And yeah, they're next, basically. Now, what do we remember, or what will we remember about Jim Montgomery? What is his legacy as Boston Bruins head coach? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. Get ready to tackle this weekend's NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. So how will Jim Montgomery be remembered as head coach of the Boston Bruins? Well, he has a fantastic regular season record with this team, a .715 point percentage despite the rough start to this season. 184 regular season games, 120 wins, 41 losses, and 23 overtime losses. He, of course, won a Jack Adams Trophy with this team, setting records for wins and points in a regular season for an NHL franchise. But he will be mostly remembered for the fact that the Bruins lost in the first round of that playoff year. And while he did lead the team to a playoff series win over the Maple Leafs, because, of course, LOL, he once again was unable to get past Paul Maurice and the Florida Panthers this past playoff run. A lot of people will say pretty much anybody could have coached that 2022-23 team to success. They were absolutely loaded and added to the roster as Don Sweeney, to his credit, went all in that year because the belief was this was it. They were going to go all the way. Now, looking back, you see Jim Montgomery coming in and helping that team go far, and perhaps that's why a guy like David Krejci came back and why Jake DeBrusk rescinded his trade request at the time. But you look at the playoffs, and that's maybe where a guy like Bruce Cassidy could have taken you a bit further because of his experience in the postseason. And we saw, of course, he won the cup with Vegas that very year. Looking back again, Bruce Cassidy was probably fired too early. He should have been given the chance to come back, coach that team. Maybe they replicate that success, go further in the playoffs. Heck, maybe win the Stanley Cup that year. And that gives him a bit more of a grace period where when they face some struggles like they're currently encountering, that's when you let him go. But they played that card very early, and now they were forced to play this card very early by firing Jim Montgomery. He's got an incredible point percentage as Boston Bruins head coach. He won a head coach of the year award. He had the benefit of an excellent goaltending tandem in Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman, the best in the NHL. Once that went away, and when he didn't use that to his advantage in the postseason, that's where things went off the rails. And you think back to that series against the Panthers where he stuck with Ullmark too long and didn't go to Swayman for the start until Game 7. Probably should have done that a bit earlier. You look at his constant line juggling. That remains an issue to this day. Think back to that series. Bergeron was out. He comes back in. You don't put him with Brad Marchand. You keep Marchand with Coyle. Just some very curious lineup decisions and maybe some overthinking, especially in the playoffs. This year, just a constant line blending. I think he'll be remembered as a good guy. We all were rooting for him, especially because of his personal history, what he's been through after being let go by the Dallas Stars, going through that recovery journey and working his way back up as an assistant with the St. Louis Blues, getting this opportunity with the Bruins. It was a great story, the regular seasons for sure. And to his credit, he did well last season with less than the previous year. And the Bruins did exceed expectations last regular season, at least, and even into the playoffs by beating Toronto, who on paper was a better team. The Bruins had the benefit of them missing some key players during that series. But again, outcoached by Paul Maurice on 2 separate occasions, and his playoff record ultimately is what he will be remembered by. And again, like I mentioned earlier, Joe Sacco does not have the playoff experience either. So we'll see if the interim tag sticks. And if they don't make the playoffs, they'll surely hire someone else. If they can rebound, make the playoffs, but still lose, who knows what will happen. There are some candidates out there. Perhaps we'll discuss that for another day. But Jim Montgomery, by all accounts, was a great guy, very personable. We were all rooting for him. Kind of a raw deal here based on the circumstances. And perhaps he got this gig. Shouldn't have. That was kind of an unforced error by Don Sweeney to let him go, to let Bruce Cassidy go in the first place. He did amazing with this team in the regular season. But the Bruins are now feeling the pinch of some bad investments in free agency, some trades that they went all in from. Looking back to that 2023 year, they had already strengthened the team. Then they went all the way in by adding Tyler Bertuzzi, giving up a first-round pick. They were able to recoup that this year in the Linus Ullmark trade. But make no mistake, the focus is entirely on management at this point. And if these struggles continue, Joe Sacco is not able to turn things around, then we're going to not even start because it's already a conversation. We're going to have to look at Don Sweeney and Cam Neely. The Bruins' next game is Thursday against Utah. That will be the first chance to see what Joe Sacco can do as head coach, interim head coach. And today they're practicing. Don Sweeney is going to meet with the media. So on tomorrow's podcast, we'll bring you what we learned from Sweeney about this start, why this decision was made, preview that Utah game, and bring you all the latest on the Boston Bruins. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. Thank you for subscribing on YouTube, on your favorite podcast app. Be sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey Next. That'll give you all the tips you need to get the advantage in your weekly matchup. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Take care of yourselves, friends. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you again here tomorrow on Locked On Boston Bruins.